Will it be dozens, hundreds, or thousands that are killed? Mayotte's worst cyclone in 90 years, flattening homes, knocking out power, cutting phone service, leaving faraway loved ones desperate to try and reach the French Indian Ocean Department. We'll ask why Chido proved so devastating and track the storm's path of destruction to Mozambique and beyond. Well, 77% of the population of Mayotte's below the poverty line. And so many shanty towns, it's little wonder so many homes got flattened. An outpost of the EU off the coast of southern Africa, Mayotte's a magnet for asylum seekers and economic migrants. Its tensions in recent years have served as a capsule of the demographic pressures that France and Europe face. The far right here want a seat in the last legislative elections. So, what response in the wake of the disaster? And what solutions going forward? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Mayotte after Cyclone Chido. And with us is Badawi Ruban, former director of UNESCO's Catastrophe Prevention Unit. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
With us as well, historian and political scientist Françoise Vergès, senior fellow at University College London's Sarah Parker Remond Center for the Study of Racism and Racialization. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to welcome back as well Mika Blujon-Mered, adjunct lecturer on the geopolitics of France's overseas, do you call them dependencies or departments, or because in French we have this acronym for both dependencies and territories.
This is an English audience, so let's call it overseas territories, like the Brits do.
Okay, very good. At the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. By the way, your reactions, as always, are welcome on the hashtag F24debate. Not since 1934 had a storm of this magnitude hit Mayotte. A deadly mix of warm ocean waters and a path that avoided landfall before it made its way over. There you see how the path that went. It was Saturday, the worst of it, before weakening as it hit southern Africa over Mozambique. Solange Mougin has more.
Homes flattened, walls blown apart, roofs that are no longer. Everything that was once inside now sprinkled on the ground amidst the rubble. In the Laboratoire neighborhood of Mayotte, little is left standing.
Here we are now in what was the dining room. The kitchen was here. You can see the sink was here.
In Sigoni in central Mayotte, the devastation is also everywhere you look. Across the Indian Ocean island, the landscapes bear the signs of Cyclone Chido, the worst storm the French department has weathered in nearly a century. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble and collapsed shacks. Hillsides have been shaved of their trees and houses. Even many cement buildings did not withstand the cyclone. By phone, France 24 spoke to a restaurant owner who said her establishment is now gone. And worse, 3 of her employees are among the missing and may be dead.
It's like a bomb went off, but it went off everywhere. I live in an apartment complex with 3 stories. It's a sturdy build and the 3rd level has been pulverized. The roof's gone. There are holes everywhere.
In France's poorest overseas territory, many of the homes were makeshift structures, unable to withstand the over 200-kilometer-per-hour winds. In the outskirts of Mamoudzou, such shanty towns abound. It's thought that around 100,000 people were living in such makeshift shacks. As rescue workers from mainland France rush to the Indian Ocean islands, and as those already there search through the rubble, fears mount about the death toll. The prefect says that hundreds, even thousands, are feared dead.
Badawi Ruban, pardon the pun, but was this a perfect storm? The fact that you have the eye of it that went straight over Mayotte, which is not a big territory, or is this the shape of things to come because of warmer ocean waters due to global warming?
This is the season of cyclones in the Indian Ocean. We have finished the season of hurricane in the Atlantic. Now we have the season of cyclones in the Indian Ocean, and the phenomena is not unusual at this time of the year. We know now, between now and the February, there will be cyclones in the Indian Ocean. But this cyclone, its intensity was indeed very strong, very high. Probably it was strong and very high because the temperature of the Indian Ocean, now the water, is increasing due to climate change. So the increase in the temperature of the water serve as a carburant to the cyclone, as it strengthens its intensity. So the cyclone was nurtured a week ago. The alert was given, the warning was given by Météo France in time.
The National Weather Service.
Yes, the National Weather Service. But the warning was not properly channeled and communicated to the citizen in the spot.
How so?
Because the warning, first of all, there is no sirens. There are no sirens in the territory. The alert was given by the text messaging. We call it the system FR Alert. This is the new text messaging which is in place now in France since a couple of years. So do we know how many inhabitants did receive this alert? Do we know how many also took it seriously, the alert? We don't know. We don't know. Also, as you know, the territory has some immigrants who, even though maybe they received the alert, but they thought that if they would go to the refugee places and anti-cyclonic refugee places, they thought that it is, a trap that they would be asked afterwards to
be expelled.
To be expelled.
Yeah.
So all this combination, all these ingredients, and of course, the territory, the built environment, the houses are completely undesigned for this velocity of wind, for this battering of rain over 5 hours. That is the result. A natural phenomena encounters a totally unprepared built and human environment.
I want to get back to those points you make, but first, let's cross over to Mozambique. After Mayotte, the storm hit the port of Pemba in the north of that country. Guy Taylor is the Mozambique spokesperson for the UN's children charity, UNICEF. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
First off, tell us what it was like. You were there when Chido hit where you are. What was it like?
It was very intense. I was actually in Quelimane last year for when Cyclone Freddy arrived, and it was a similar experience. We had several hours of very, very intense winds and rain passing over. Obviously, we weren't able to go out. In the morning, we were able to take a look around the city of Pemba and get a kind of an understanding of the impact that the storm had brought. And we saw quite widespread damage to people's homes, many people who'd lost everything. Hospitals, schools put out of action, and serious damage to electricity, water infrastructure. Today, our teams have been able to go out into some of the more rural areas around here. These are really some of the poorest areas in the country, in the world, really, where people are living in very rudimentary conditions, houses built of bamboo, people living in very, very basic structures. And obviously those were not able by any means to stand up to the onslaught of the cyclone. And many people there also have lost everything, many children, many families, and now at risk of things like waterborne diseases. We had a lot of flooding. We're very concerned about cholera, about malaria, about diarrhea, some of the biggest killers of children, and also prolonged impact in terms of cutting people off from key services, from healthcare, from clean water and sanitation, and from schools, of course, when schools are supposed to go back in the new year. So it's a very challenging situation for people who have already faced up to a lot in this area of Mozambique.
The toll we're reading is 3 killed where you are, which is going to turn out to be just a fraction of what we may get when the final numbers come in from Mayotte. And the storm has weakened. Just want your reaction to what we just heard there from Badawi earlier about preparedness for these kinds of disasters. Yeah. Was it this time, and how is it usually when you're in Mozambique? Are people given enough early warning? What's it been like?
Yeah, I mean, I will say just first of all that I think we're still at the very early stages of assessing the full impact of this cyclone on Mozambique. As I said, we've only really today been able to get up to some of the more rural areas, and not even today out to some of the hardest to reach areas. So I think those numbers will unfortunately likely go up potentially considerably. We did a lot of work together with our partners, working with government to ensure preparedness for this storm to the extent that one can be prepared, and to the extent that communities like the communities here can be prepared given their very real fragility. We pre-positioned large quantities of supplies. We developed emergency action plans. There were efforts certainly to warn the population ahead of the storm. UNICEF also has an SMS messaging system through which we reached about 150,000 people with comprehensive information on how to prepare for cyclones and flooding and what to do during and afterwards. So to some extent, but I think, this is a country where 3.4 million children are already in need of humanitarian assistance, and people living really in very, very precarious circumstances. So it's never going to be able to be fully ready for a disaster of this magnitude. And I think the needs really here far outstrip the capacity that we have, the humanitarian system, UNICEF, to respond. So more support urgently needed, I think.
I want to thank you so much for being with us, Guy Taylor from Pemba in northern Mozambique, for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Françoise Vergès, a lot to unpack in what we've just heard, beginning with, you heard there the UNICEF spokesperson expressing concern over disease. A lot of French people, even though it is a French department, looking to find out where Mayotte is on the map this Monday, and discovering as well that there was already a cholera outbreak in Mayotte before the storm hit.
Yes, there was an outbreak of cholera. We know also that the water crisis is just lasted, for so many years now. So yes, it's a very absolutely situation where diarrhea or, cholera and other problems are inevitable, almost inevitable. There is no more water. There's no more water, and the water that will be polluted. So of course, the state going to bring water from Réunion or Mauritius, as it did, last year and this year. But, we saw the image, we saw the extent of devastation. And so we also have to think about what people feel, what do they see? They see their life, there is nothing more. So I will add also to this question of health, mental health, trauma. The children, people who have lost also their close one, who have no news about the close one, and that will add to the stress, the fear of not finding food tomorrow, fear of them in the street, the road, or you cannot circulate. So feeling the place, the island is very small.
Yeah, it's less than 400,000 people?
Yes, very small, and at the same time very populated, very poor, very young. And very devastated.
Very poor, but there are people from Mozambique who'd like to go to Mayotte.
I know, because effectively, if you are, in Mozambique or in the Comoro Islands or even Madagascar, Mayotte will look like much better. But we do know that, that it's not a total illusion, of course, but nonetheless, it does not resolve the problem. And we know that Mayotte is some kind of a dead hand. How, because we are talking, this is an emergency, and we have to rush because people otherwise will die. But tomorrow, in 2 months, in 3 months, as you were saying, cholera already, water crisis already, deforestation already, how is this going to be solved?
And Mika Bijol-Mered, already there are questions about what you were mentioning earlier, Badawi, which is obviously structures, corrugated roofs and shacks and the such that are not built for the storms. Even some of the sturdier buildings have come down. So the question is, how do you do it in an emergency?
You don't. The blunt truth is you don't. And that's what we're saying now in Mayotte. You don't, and there's even like a more important factor even. There is no, in the Mahorean history, or culture, there is no popular recalling of a precedent. It's not like in Guadeloupe or in Saint Martin, or these other places, or in Réunion Island, where people have suffered from cyclones, storms of that magnitude, or even higher magnitude, several times over the past 4, 5, 6 decades. For example, in my family in Guadeloupe, my grandmother, when I was growing up, I didn't grow up in Guadeloupe itself. Grew up in Paris, but my grandmother from Guadeloupe, she kept on telling me, oh, you know, when you live there, we've gone through that cyclone. Hugo in 1989 was a trauma, massive disaster, and the likes. So basically, this information, how to survive a storm, how to prepare yourself, your family for a storm, it comes from generation to generation. Here in Mayotte, no such thing takes place.
And maybe we could call up again that map, because you see on the map how this storm carved a path where it went around Madagascar and then directly through Mayotte.
Indeed. There's two things here to say. First of all, the fact that such a storm, the eye of the storm, would hit straight a small island like Mayotte is a rare thing. And then, what's even more rare than that, is the fact that such a cyclone would go over the top north of Madagascar. Usually they don't. That's not their route in the region. So based on that, Mayotte has never really suffered, at least not for the past 90 years, of such a disaster. Nothing that in the local culture would make it something that everybody would know and would prepare for, unlike what we have in Guadeloupe or even on Réunion Islands. And then the second thing that I think is extremely important, we don't know how much people there is on Mayotte. That's the other bland truth that we need to talk about. Basically, the official figures are somewhere around 320,000 inhabitants, okay? Half of which are basically foreigners coming from Comores, or for some of them Madagascar or Mozambique. But in fact, there's many more. There's much, much more people than that. And a lot of them will be orphan kids, left to themselves, living in those, you can't even call them houses, of course. These kids are left alone to survive in these disasters. And of course, they can't.
And it's a French department. And the matrix for handling natural disasters in France is one where you look at the planning permits, you look at how things are. It's completely different when you're in somewhere like Mayotte.
Yes, definitely. France is the documents in France for building anti-cyclone houses, for building anti-seismic houses, for building flood-resistant houses are very well conceived now. But are they implemented? In the metropole, they are somehow well implemented.
On the mainland, yeah.
But on the mainland. But in Mayotte, nothing of this was in...
And Mika was saying, here we're in an emergency. So
Yes.
what do you do now? You just build shelters?
Now you have to go through a transition period. Next few months will be devoted to build something transitional, temporary housing. You need that. You need to shelter people now. But what to do in the long run? Where is going to have... We have to have a city planning, a sound city planning, which will not make this disaster occur again in 3 decades or in 2 decades. This is the worst natural disaster that France has experienced in the recent history of France, because Mayotte is a French department.
Françoise Vergès?
Well, I will say that even, in Réunion, I'm not sure we are so prepared, to the magnitude of this. Of course, it's more developed, so, you will have less dead than in Mayotte. But the deforestation, the way, housing is being made, Réunion is very mountainous. I mean, when you look at it, I was there, like 2 weeks ago again, you look at it and you feel this will not stand. This and the fact that everything comes from France. The food, I mean, according to, people who studied, they say we have like for a week at the most for, food. So there is this too. So you can, of course, organize a plane every day, but nonetheless, there is a structural problem in the so-called overseas department. It's always the emergency, and we rush, and it's very important that there is humanitarian aid right now in Mayotte.
Yeah, because right now the bridgehead goes from Paris to Reunion Island to Mayotte.
Yeah. But tomorrow, I mean, effectively, we can think, but there, you know what you were saying, you know, so many children being abandoned. So many, I mean, there is a situation that goes beyond even, you know, Chido. Chido is revealing what was there, already an incredible crisis. And it reveals it brings it, you know, we see it. And as you were saying, some people were looking where Mayotte is this morning. But even the image, we had no idea that the island was, you know, like what we see, you know, like this devastated hill. You know, like nothing is standing anymore.
2 points going back to what my colleagues have just said. First of all, when it comes to Reunion Island has suffered from a storm last January 2024, that was kind of similar in terms of magnitude. You didn't see that kind of problems. You didn't see that kind of impact on the populations, on the habitats and the likes. Nothing similar. So basically, yes, Reunion Island is better prepared, and that can be explained. But with that saying, it doesn't mean that Reunion Island is fully prepared for what's coming with climate change moving forward. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and energy and infrastructure resilience is a key factor. I worked on the hydrogen strategy of Reunion Island this past year, and after the cyclone in January, we included a specific component with regards to infrastructure resilience because of that, using hydrogen, but we can talk about that maybe at some other time. And the second point I wanted to go back to is, at the moment, you can't even build emergency shelters. The reason why that is the port is unusable. The airport is unusable either because the control tower is gone.
And right now it's just military aircraft that are landing.
Precisely. So there's only so much you can do, even in terms of emergency assistance. And here, once again, this is a very specific, that's very different from what we've seen with Irma in 2017 in Saint Martin or in Guadeloupe in previous times even. Because here, even if you want to bring to the population the required emergency that they need, help that they need, you can't even do it.
The French department, Mayotte, with the highest birth rate as well, but it's also the one with the largest maternity ward, a maternity ward that was not spared by Cyclone Chido. It's a report read by Siobhan Silk.
The alarms from the medical equipment are almost drowned out by the wind. This was the view from inside Mayotte's only hospital, as Cyclone Chido battered the wards. Now that the storm has died down, the attention of staff is split between caring for the patients and trying to clean up the mess. Staff in the neonatal ward are protecting the youngest and most vulnerable patients. It is normally France's largest maternity ward, but now it is underwater and operating at only 30% capacity.
The rain is falling inside the building. The roof is gone. The water's getting into the patients' rooms. We're seeing what we can do to move the patients from the rooms and find other places for them. I'm speaking from my office. The roof is on the floor in front of me. But I'm sleeping in my office because my house is gone. It was completely destroyed by the cyclone.
The psychiatric service is facing a similar catastrophe. 9 inpatients have been gathered in the few rooms that remain habitable.
3 of the 10 rooms are functional. Roofs were carried away. Windows shattered and all of our computer equipment is waterlogged. We no longer have access to our patient files. We can't do our work.
Doctors are especially concerned about a lack of clean water at the hospital. They fear the conditions could lead to an epidemic.
Françoise Vergès, how are you expecting, right now here in France, we don't have a government. We're waiting on a new one. It was the outgoing interior minister who went to show that the Republic is there. How are you expecting the response to be?
I don't think what was said and what we saw is and how they're going to transform something that has been in crisis for so many years. It's not just like a moment like that, and effectively emergency, and you arrive and there is an infrastructure. We see the infrastructure has disappeared. So it's a real situation that I'm afraid also we're going to see more and more because of the climate disaster and the situation of a lot of unprepared, what we saw in Valence, even in Spain, right, in the middle of Europe, So what is the preparedness for this? What is the preparedness? Because if you look, roads are still being built, buildings are being built, not effectively looking at climate disaster. And there is and what is a preparedness, as I say, in terms of medicine, in terms of, as we saw, the hospital cannot function, the basic need of daily life. Not really something in 10 years, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, for all these women, children, and other people who are living this in dire poverty.
Mika?
Without electricity, the island can't move forward. So 85% of the electricity sources were shut down because of the storm. If you don't have electricity, you can't activate the compressors that basically have the water flow through the water pipes. If you don't have electricity, the telecommunications and radio towers don't work either. So you can't tell the population, hey, you could come in here, you could come in here, we could help you here, we could help you there. There's gonna be like a food distribution here or there. This is something that without this infrastructure resilience, nothing's happening. I just wanted to give here a brief shout out, if you allow me to, a brief shout out to your colleagues at Mayotte La Première, so the public radio and TV station there. They informed everyone because they're the only emergency network that actually worked during the storm until their roof went away.
Yeah.
That's the situation we're in at the moment. No resilience at all.
How far, how far do you get with generators in a crisis like this one?
The whole authorities now in the mainland in France are mobilized. I think there is no other choice for them not to get mobilized. Yeah. There will be enormous challenges, including the energy, the electricity challenge. But the other big challenge, the priority of priorities, is the water.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Drinking water, but also sanitation water, everyday life. You need this for the people now who survived, but also you need that to be available for those for the helpers, for the first aid troops which will arrive. So there are enormous challenges, and this disaster is going really to test France. Is going to test France, deeply for the coming weeks and months. I don't know whether the authorities will be able to stand up to the challenges.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people know that actually in Mayotte we've had water rationing for the past year.
Yeah.
So before the crisis and everything, you already had water rationing. What are you going to have now? This is the kind of situation we're in.
And again, it's a far-flung outpost, you might say, of the European Union, being in the southern Indian Ocean, the poorest, but also coveted by those who seek a better life throughout southern Africa. Matthew-Mary Cauchet has more on the inherent challenges that Mayotte faces.
Even before this week's devastating cyclone, a plethora of problems plagued Mayotte, located in the Indian Ocean 8,000 kilometers from mainland France. Mayotte is poorer than any other part of France, as 77% of its 320,000 inhabitants live in poverty, 5 times the national average. The islands are thus heavily dependent on financial assistance from the French government. Crime is also a major issue, with gun violence twice as frequent and a murder rate 5 times larger than in mainland France. At the same time, Mayotte has the fastest growing population in France, increasing nearly 4% a year, the result of a high birth rate and immigration. Even though Mayotte is much poorer than the rest of France, its GDP per capita is still 8 times that of its neighbor, the Comoros, and as much as 20 times those of countries on mainland Africa. This has caused a major influx in immigration, as each year thousands of migrants try to reach Mayotte by sea and now make up nearly half of Mayotte's population. The influx of migrants has put pressure on schools, housing, and the healthcare system. This has caused major tension and sometimes violent unrest, as Mayotte's inhabitants have grown frustrated with the strain on already scarce resources.
Françoise Vergès, before the French government fell, the headlines when you talked about Mayotte were about the bill to scrap birthright, which exists in France, elsewhere, including the other overseas departments and territories. In fact, the President of the Senate said they should extend it as well to places like St. Martin and so that talk about trying to scrap birthright. It also follows the fact that you have it has two members of parliament, and now one of those two members is from the National Rally of the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. The conversation about Mayotte, is it going to be the same when you look at that report?
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid, it's not spontaneous that a situation like that bring incredible consciousness, and we need to change. It also may bring, on the contrary, a consolidation of different positions. I mean, the story of birth rate, of course, there is a lot of birth rate, but the constant accusation on women in the world, especially in what's called the third world, of being responsible for poverty and underdevelopment, as was being said, is really. I mean, for me, it's really, as a feminist, this is not the problem. The problem is how to provide school, how to provide. We know that women, when their life is better, all over the world, there is no society that escapes that, have less children. Make the better life for women, they will have less children, they will want to have a life. So the responsibility is also on, those responsible for the daily life. And effectively, also, National Rally is very strong in Mayotte, and we can, analyze why. But again, blaming...
Because they see a lot of illegal migrants coming in. And
they see, but it happened even before. Even, the separation of Mayotte from the Comoro was also laid by the elite, a part of the elite of Mayotte, and a part of that elite was, close to the opinion of the current National Rally.
Give us a bit of history here, because Mayotte's been French since the mid-19th century. 1974, they decide to remain with France and not join the independence bid of the Comoro Islands.
Yeah, there was a long story about that. I mean, there is a book right now by the journalist Rémi Carayol, called Mayotte, un département colonie. And we explain effectively how this came, why the Mayotte population, how this was also fabricated, how part of the elite of Mayotte was absolutely for remaining with the French, how this started even to have a fabrication of we are not Muslim, that the other Muslim, we are different Muslim, So, this is a population which is, Muslim and black, in all the Comoro Islands. So there was all this fabrication. It's very well explained. And it was not, the government in France, a part of the government was to give the independence to the whole of archipelago. And a part of the government was like, no, this has to remain. Was already by the army, defended also by the army, we need, to have that part in the Indian Ocean to keep it. There was also already interest by corporation, or they might need, something around. Mesmer and Michel Debré were very strongly, attached to keep
These were the heads of the government at the time.
Mayotte in France. So there is, this can be explained, but what we have is today, right? Today with this situation, and effectively migrants go there from Central Africa and from, Comoro Island, because, if it's anyone, even high, will go where, there is better, what I see as better for me and my children or my family than where I live.
So a familiar story for any overseas territory of France, Mika Blujon-Mered, regularly protest movements over the cost of living. We saw them in 2018. We saw them earlier this year in the case of Mayotte. But it's the same question as we ask protest movements, but they're not necessarily pro-independence movements for islands that import everything. Or if there are some people who are pro-independence, but it's not necessarily a majority movement. And so there is this kind of, what do we call it? A love-hate relationship? I don't know how to characterize it with France.
It's weird. I would characterize it as weird autonomism. Let's put it this way, meaning that people really would like to have a better life, but who can provide that better life? At the moment, only the French state, and by extension, the European Union to some extent, can provide that. If it's not France, who is it gonna be? And here, this question, this dichotomy that I'm posing here on the table, it's precisely the same that we're having in French Guiana, we're having in New Caledonia, we're having in Polynesia. Almost all, not all of them, but almost all of France's overseas department, regions, and territories are suffering from this debate, which is actually hard to find a solution to. The only solution that could be offered by the French state here on this table is more money. More money and a better redistribution on the territory of that money. But here, we need to talk about how much money we're willing, as Parisians or as the French state, is willing to provide to these territories. At the moment, the Mayotte law, which has been discussed and postponed many times since 2021, this Mayotte law, before Chido and even now after Chido, will not be enough to actually meet the basic law requirements that have been set in the 2016 Real Equality, that's how it's called, Real Equality, Égalité Réelle, for the Outre-mer, in the sense of Mayotte, with that money now, would not even be able to make up the gap with the rest of France, let alone the rest of the Outre-mer territories. So the situation is dire. Just let me give you two figures just to figure out, to understand the order of magnitude we're talking about. We're talking about 70% unemployment on Mayotte, 70% unemployment. We're talking about 42% of the population living with less than 160 euros per month, which is basically less than 1/10 of the minimum wage in France. So basically, this is what we're talking about. In France altogether. In France altogether, the minimum wage applies to the overseas territories as well. So basically here, this is a situation. And this situation right here, it will require dozens and dozens and dozens of billions of euros of public money, public support to get that territory just to be on par with Réunion Island in the same region or with French Guiana or other territories. And once we get that, maybe we can have a sane debate with regards to, are you an autonomist, are you an independentist, and whatnot.
Françoise Vergès?
Well, I would say that, in this, when we look at Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guyana, or Réunion, for instance, in the 1960s, 1950s, there were like movement asking for more autonomy and saying, okay, France, you keep foreign affairs and defense, and we will be sovereign about everything else, education, health, our economy, and we will also trade with our neighbor. We will not need to bring camembert from France. We will, see what we can bring from Madagascar, or, if I talk about Réunion, we are surrounded, with South Africa. From Réunion, you cannot go very easily to South Africa, which is just right there. You have, so all this brought more and more dependency because the French state opposed a very strong repression against this movement for autonomy, demanding, and perhaps if
is that still the case today?
Yes, it's still the case today. Because then, there was even diversification of culture, drop the sugar cane, make things like that. There was a possibility. I'm not saying perhaps, it would have been very, nice and easy, but there were a possibility. The state stopped it. Today, it's more and more dependency. We are more dependent today in Réunion and Mayotte than we were, let's say 4 decades ago, where effectively when I grew up, and I'm not, 100-year-old, we had meat from Madagascar in Réunion, and rice. Today, no. So there was, an incredible dependency about medicine, about everything. And so equality to get us where? To get us where? We may be equal, but nonetheless we are in the Indian Ocean, like Mayotte. And what is our region? What is about? We have Africa, Madagascar, we have India, we have the Gulf state here, there is war in Sudan and so on. And we play like we are in, Le Limousin. We are not Limousin.
Badawi Rouban, talking about if you're going to get construction materials for rebuilding, you're right next to Africa. You could even, it's not even that far to go to somewhere like New Zealand compared to going to the Northern Hemisphere.
What's a pity is that, in July, there was a parliamentary commission in France. There was a commission which was focusing on the problem of those islands regarding vulnerability to natural hazard. And one of the main recommendations was that cooperation, regional cooperation, should be in place, should be put in place, including for standing up to natural disaster and the reconstruction process and all sorts of things, including aid now. Now, if we look to Mayotte, where is aid going to be coming from except from the whole French South Africa, is the French government going to ask South Africa to contribute or not? These are questions. Are European countries going to get into the play or not? So here, the reconstruction is going to be a major challenge, including physically, but also geopolitically.
And what kind of building you do.
And what kind of building?
In Réunion, in Mayotte also, you have building for France, for continental France. And these are these are tropical islands, so you need air conditioning constantly, which means the question of energy and the question of pollution, etc., etc. This adaptation also to the place, to the context, and also to the threat of cyclone, which is going to become more and more dangerous because of climate change and because the water of the Indian Ocean are warming much faster than any other ocean.
Just very briefly on that point, on that last point you make, Badawi Rouban, there's a backlash these days here in Europe and particularly in the United States against environmentalism. The oceans that are warming, when you talk about it, are people listening?
Today, only a minority now is not aware of the risk of climate change is posing to us. I think even in the United States, today, even if the administration may be tempted to pull out again on the Paris Agreement, I think the United States civil society, academic societies, some independent
What
states.
Françoise Vergès is just talking about was, for instance, veering away from always putting in more air conditioning. Or people in the West who like their creature comforts, are they going to go for it?
The train running against climate change you cannot stop it anymore. I think we should be aware now that the climate change is going to make this kind of disasters more and more common, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We're going to have to unfortunately leave it there. Badawi Rouban, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Françoise Vergès, Mika Bujon, Mered. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.